Everglades National Park, Florida. Invasive species. Everglades National Park is located in the southwestern tip of southern Florida. Everglades National Park, as pictured here, can be seen as a primarily low-lying area. Authorized in 1934, Everglades National Park is a subtropical zone home to one of the most diverse populations of native species. The native species of Everglades National Park are being threatened by invasive species or non-native species. Without a solution, some native species populations could go extinct. So what is an invasive species? According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, an invasive species is defined as an animal or plant from another region of the world that does not belong in their new environment. Everglades National Park has become home to various invasive species of plants and animals. The Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area lists the top 12 invasive species in Everglades National Park as the following. Plants include the Australian pine, the Old World climbing fern, the Brazilian pepper, and the air potato. Whereas animals include the Burmese python, the Tugu lizard, chameleons, Nile monitors, the Cuban tree frog, the giant African snail, the bullseye snakehead, and the lionfish. So how do invasive species affect Everglades National Park? Invasive species hurt the ecosystem of the Everglades National Park by negatively affecting the native species. Invasive species are taking over the ecosystem of Everglades National Park by pushing the native species out. The Australian pine. Native to Australia and Southeast Asia, it was intentionally introduced in the 1800s for ditch and canal stabilization as well as shade and lumber. The Australian pine shades out native vegetation. Shallow root system does not protect the surrounding areas from erosion, and has taken over the nesting areas of sea turtles and the American crocodile. The Old World climbing fern. Native to Africa, Asia, and Australia, it escaped cultivation in the 1960s. The Old World climbing fern invades developed areas and ecologically sensitive natural areas. It grows over native vegetation, reducing plant diversity, and acts as a fire ladder that will carry fire into the canopy. The Brazilian pepper. Native to South America, it was intentionally introduced in the 1890s and then again in the late 1920s as a landscape ornamental. The Brazilian pepper shades out native vegetation. It also produces an allelopathic chemical, or chemicals, in the soil that prevent other plant growth, displaces native vegetation, and threatens the nesting grounds of the gopher tortoise. It hosts an additional invasive species that are harmful to citrus trees and can cause skin irritation to humans. The air potato. Native to Asia and Africa, it was intentionally introduced in 1905 as a medicinal plant. The air potato can smother and shade native vegetation, decrease wildlife habitat, and can completely engulf an area, making it unusable. The Burmese python and other non-native constrictors. Native to Southeast Asia, Africa, Central, and South America, it was imported as a pet, and it either escaped or was intentionally released from captivity. The Burmese python threatens native wildlife and the ecosystem. It has caused severe decline in native mammal populations, and it is known to eat wood storks, key largo wood rats, limpkins, alligators, and white-tailed deer, and bobcats. They compete with native predators for food, habitat, and space. The Tugu lizard. Native to South America, they were imported as pets, and they either escaped or were intentionally released from captivity. The Tugu lizard threatens the reproduction of native wildlife, as they are known to eat alligator, turtle, and ground-dwelling bird eggs. Chameleons. Native to Africa, southern Europe, and southern Asia, they were imported as pets, and they either escaped or were intentionally released from captivity. The chameleon has a high reproductive rate and are known to eat native species. They will continue to pose a threat as their population increases. The Nile monitor. Native to Africa, they were imported as pets and either escaped or were intentionally released from captivity. They threaten and prey on native species such as mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and their eggs. They also pose a threat to domestic animals. The Cuban tree frog. Native to Cuba, they were inadvertently introduced through the importation of goods. The Cuban tree frog prey on native tree frogs. They threaten native species food supplies, invade homes and businesses. They've also been known to invade electrical generating equipment, resulting in power outages, and can emit a noxious skin secretion extremely irritating to the eyes and nose of humans. The giant African snail. Native to East Africa, was initially introduced in the 1960s as a released pet and reintroduced in the early 2010s for the use of religious rituals. The giant African snail has a ferocious appetite that threatens native vegetation. They've been known to wipe out small farms overnight and will eat stucco off of houses and paint off of cars to supplement calcium intake. They also cause a road hazard as their shells can puncture vehicle tires and potentially pose a public health threat as they are known to carry a parasitic rat lungworm that can cause meningitis. The bullseye snakehead. Native to tropical areas of Asia, the introduction to the ecosystem is unknown, either time or reason. The bullseye snakehead prey on native species. They threaten native species through the competition of food and habitat. The lionfish. Native to the Indian and Pacific Oceans, they were imported as pets and were intentionally and unintentionally released from captivity. The lionfish prey on native species, compete with native species for food, and impact reef habitat by eliminating organisms that serve important ecological roles. So what is the solution? The National Park System has initiated the Invasive Plant Program as well as the Invasive Animal Program to research the invasive species population. The state of Florida has imposed additional restrictions on the importation and possession of invasive species, such as having certain animals as pets. The National Park Service, along with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, have begun hiring hunters in an attempt to eradicate invasive species such as the Burmese python. Various groups are taking efforts to implement what is known as the invasion curve. In this slide, the invasion curve is addressed. The steps or attempts to curb invasive species are prevention, eradication, containment, and resource protection and long-term management. What step is taken is all determined on what type of invasion or what level of invasion a species is at, as seen below, including the absence of a species, a small number of a species, a rapid increase of distribution and abundance of a species, and the widespread and abundantness of a species. In conclusion, Everglades National Park is severely threatened by invasive species. Invasive species have made the conservation of the Everglades National Park difficult. Without a solution, the future of Everglades National Park could be in danger as well as the enjoyment of the park by future generations. Attempts are being made, but only time will tell if the attempts are effective.